It wasn't thunder. That's what Sheriff Thomas Granger kept telling himself each time the wind shook the window panes of the aging station house. The storm had swept in the night before, cold, quick, and angry. But something in the noise had stirred him differently. He'd done 2 tours in the war, seen soldiers fall from treetops like snapped branches. He understood the sound of pain when it came softly. And this wasn't wind. It was deeper, something old, buried, alive beneath the soil. Kota sensed it. 2. The aging German shepherd hadn't budged from the porch since dusk. He just sat, ears twitching, head turned to the horizon like he was listening for something lost. Then came the envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just a crumpled piece of mail slipped beneath the station's front door. The sheriff picked it up with his worn fingers and used the edge of his badge to open it. Inside, scrawled in trembling handwriting, was a single sentence. The children still cry beneath her floor. Pine Hollow. Tennessee wasn't the kind of town where things moved fast. Unless it was a tractor pull or a barn catching fire, time passed slow. Folks there only trusted what they could hold: fresh milk, a neighbor's nod, Sunday sermons. Margaret Dawson had been a fixture in that quiet for nearly 2 decades. She ran the Dawson farm, once a grand estate, now an orphanage on the outskirts. White columns, rocking chairs, chickens weaving between bushes heavy with blooms. Every Christmas she dressed as Mrs. Claus, handing out presents downtown. Every Easter, she served food to the hungry at the church. They called her Mother Dawson. Said she was the best kind of soul in a place that had seen too many dark ones. But Granger never cared much for saints. That morning, he drove out to the Dawson property, Kota riding beside him in the passenger seat. The storm hadn't let up. Grey clouds churned above like concrete dents, sluggish. Not sure what we're looking for, boy, the sheriff muttered, scratching the dog's neck. But you'll let me know when you find it. Kota let out a low whine, already staring at the barn, or it looked too neat. That was Granger's first thought when Margaret Dawson greeted them at the gate. She wore pearl earrings and a shawl that clashed with the mud caked on her boots. Her smile was polite, but tight. Her eyes even more so. "And what brings you out here today?" she asked, her voice sweet but with a bite. "Like pie left too long in the sun." "Just checking in," Granger replied, tipping his hat. "Storms coming hard, wanted to see how the kids are doing." She paused, then stepped aside. "Of course, we're always happy to see the law." Inside the dining room, a dozen children sat quietly, faces clean, hands folded, plates of steaming biscuits before them. They looked fine, too fine, but Kota didn't care about the food. He moved slowly, nose pressed to the floor, ignoring open doors and silent grins. Then he stopped at the barn, growling, tail stiff. He pawed the doorway like something waited beneath it. "That's just storage," Margaret said quickly. "Old tools and sharp things, not safe for children." "I'd still like a look," Granger told her. Her smile twitched. Of course, inside the barn was still. Even the storm seemed to pause. Kota sniffed around a worn spot near the back wall. Granger tapped it with his boot. "Hollow. You use the basement." "We don't have one," Margaret said, without hesitation. Kota barked, one sharp, decisive. Like a judge's gavel, Margaret flinched. Granger pressed against the floorboards, but they didn't budge. No hinges, no seams. Just age and dust. Still, Kota refused to leave. That night, Granger sat in his office. The letter in his hands, again. Sleep didn't come. Kota paced restlessly, his head low, like he was tracking something unseen but undeniable. At exactly 2:13 a.m., he barked once and faced the window. That's when the sheriff heard it again. Not the wind, not thunder, a faint sound, wet, distant, like a child trying not to cry. The next morning, Granger walked through town. The Dawson Spring fundraiser was the talk of the place. Posters hung outside the diner and feed store, all promising to help clothe and feed the orphaned children. Margaret's face was printed on every one, smiling like she'd already been carved into a stained glass window. That's when he saw Eliza May. Small girl, maybe 10, hair dark as ink. She'd come to the Dawson place a year prior, after her mother overdosed. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked past and slipped a folded note into his coat pocket. Granger opened it inside the diner. Behind his coffee mug, "They take us when the train whistles. Please listen to him. He knows. No name. But the sheriff knew where it came from. The train passed every Thursday night at 10:05 p.m., right by the Dawson property." He looked down. Cota had followed him in without being told. The dog was staring at the train schedule pinned to the bulletin board. Granger wasn't a man who believed in signs. But this wasn't a sign. This was a pattern. That evening, he returned to the Dawson farm. Alone, Margaret answered with her usual poise. "Wasn't expecting company tonight. Not a visit," he said. "This is official." He handed her an inspection order, signed by the county judge. Her expression didn't change. "Very well," she replied. "Let's begin." She walked him through every space: bedrooms, kitchen, and even a cellar that, strangely, now existed. But it held nothing but dust and old furniture. Then he asked to see the barn again. Margaret paused. Just a moment. But that moment was enough. Inside, the light was dim. Cota darted to the same floorboard and barked 3 sharp calls. Granger pulled a crowbar from behind a beam. He slid it under the plank. It creaked, resisting, but gave way. Beneath it was a latchen iron ring, rusted and forgotten, hidden under straw and years of silence. He looked up at Margaret. Her smile was gone. Cota growled, low and warning. Granger's hands were steady as he gripped the ring and lifted. It opened with a groan, the sound of old secrets surfacing. Dust spiraled into the air, and the truth waited below. The trapdoor groaned as it opened, revealing nothing but a heavy, suffocating darkness. The air was thick, still, and unmoving. This time, Cota didn't bark. He lowered his head and let out a low growl, not one of warning, but something deeper, a sound of mourning. "What is this place?" Margaret Dawson asked, her voice barely a whisper, brittle and thin. "That's what I intend to find out," Granger replied, his voice steady. He pulled out his flashlight and aimed the beam down into the gloom. Wooden steps descended into shadow, cobwebs drifting in the light like sorrow woven into lace. The air reeked of rust and mildew along with something else, something that shouldn't have been there. "I'll need you to wait outside." "Ma'am," Granger said, without looking back. Margaret didn't respond. She didn't move either. Granger gave a nod to Cota. "Let's go." Without hesitation, the dogs stepped into the darkness. Each stair groaned beneath their weight, like old bones telling secrets no one wanted to hear. It felt less like walking into a room, and more like stepping into a buried truth. At the bottom, they found a small stone room with a dirt floor, roughly the size of a tool shed. Empty crates were stacked in a corner. A single metal chair was bolted to the ground. Chains hung beside it, old, rusted, and quiet now, though they hadn't always been. Cota sniffed the ground, then lifted his head and pointed his nose at the far wall. Granger followed the flashlight's beam. That's when he saw a smear of faded red. Old, but unmistakable. Blood. He took a slow step backward, not out of fear, but rage. Breathing in deeply, he muttered, "We're not finished." When they climbed back up, Margaret was gone. Granger slammed the trapdoor shut, backed his truck to the barn, and radioed for support. Deputy Eli Boone arrived 20 minutes later, lazily chewing sunflower seeds like it was just another call. "You sure you're not making too much of this?" Boone asked, nudging a rock with his boot toward the chicken coop. "That woman's a saint around here. Paid for the school's roof with her own money." Granger pointed toward the barn. "There's a hidden room down there, Eli. Chains on the wall, blood. And not a single word about it in any town record." Boone blinked hell. Granger locked eyes with him. "State's taking over. Don't say a word, not to the mayor, not to the reverend, not to your cousin working the counter at the diner. No one." Boone nodded slowly. "Got it." That night, something in the town shifted. Not just the wind, the atmosphere. No official word had spread yet. But Pine Hollow could sniff out trouble like smoke on the breeze. At the general store, people noticed Margaret hadn't picked up her order of flour and lamp oil. The town librarian mentioned seeing her hurriedly packing up books, and Eliza May, quiet little Eliza, didn't show up to school that morning. The next day, Sheriff Granger returned to the Dawson property, warrant in hand. The place was too quiet. No laughter in the yard. No steam from the kitchen chimney, just silence. And the crows circling the barn above. Inside, furniture had been knocked over. Drawers left wide open. A single boot abandoned near the front door. She'd fled, but not with everyone. It was Kota who found the second entrance behind the pantry, a hidden wall with rusted hinges and a rotten frame. Granger braced himself and forced it open. Inside, 3 children huddled together, filthy, thin, silent. One girl looked up, bruised temple, a missing front tooth, but she didn't shed a tear. None of them did. Paramedics arrived, social workers, the town doctor, even the pastor who stood in the doorway like a man whose faith had just been tested. "These kids," he choked. "I baptized 2 of them." Granger said nothing, because there was more. Beneath the barn, past the trapdoor and through the dirt, Kota had found something else. A second layer, hidden beneath the floor, wooden planks sealed with iron nails. Granger and Boone pried them loose. A tunnel stretched below the property, narrow and long, like a forgotten artery. And along that tunnel, they found 7 more children, alive, barely, but alive. The state arrived within hours. Federal agents, child services, a line of dark sedans and white vans. The press hadn't caught wind of it yet, but they would. Granger stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching agents snap photos and haul boxes from the house. One of them, a woman from Nashville named Agent Revera, walked over and crouched in front of Kota, scratching gently behind his ears. "He found all of them?" she asked softly. Granger nodded. "He doesn't stop. Not until they're safe." That night, the sheriff stayed late at the station. Past midnight, he pored over every document Dawson Farm had ever submitted: foster licenses, adoption papers, spotless audits, glowing state reviews. All of it false. Some of the children were listed as adopted by families who didn't exist. Others were said to have died from illnesses that left no trace, no certificate, no report. Some had supposedly been transferred to out-of-state homes that had never heard of them. It was a long con. A shell game played with the lives of children, too small to fight back. At 2:03 a.m., the train whistle blew. Kota stood, and that's when it hit Granger like a bullet between the shoulders. The sound of the train was always the signal. Eliza had written that in her note. Those words echoed in his mind as he grabbed his coat. The old railway spur behind the Dawson land hadn't seen official use in years, but Granger had grown up here. He knew the hidden paths, the old shortcuts. People buried their truths and hoped no one would find them. He drove with the headlights off. Stopping just behind the tree line, Kota was already growling when Granger saw it, a covered wagon, creeping slowly toward the tracks. He reached for his rifle and stepped out. Moving silently through the underbrush, Kota at his side, they approached the barn. 2 men were unloading crates, each one labeled as farm equipment. But then one shifted and something inside let out a scream. Granger acted fast, hands up. "Sheriff's office," he shouted. One of the men bolted. Kota launched after him, bringing him down with a snarl. The second man raised his hands too late. Deputy Boone arrived moments later, breath ragged and muttering curses. "We got them," Granger said, prying open one of the crates. Inside was a child, sedated, but alive. They uncovered 6 crates in total. Only 3 had children. The rest were empty. Margaret Dawson was nowhere to be found. The next morning, a black envelope appeared at the sheriff's station. No return address. No sender. Inside was a photograph, a woman's hand holding a Charleston-bound boarding passant. A Bible verse scrawled on the back, "And no one sees the tears of the righteous when they fall." Just after sunrise, Granger returned to the Dawson farm. Federal warrant in hand, Kota by his side. The barn smelled different, now smoke and pine tar. A scrubbed clean scent that came too late. They'd already uncovered the surface rot the night before, but Granger could feel it. This went deeper. "You ready?" he asked. Kota didn't bark. He just stood there, ears forward, still as stone. Inside, federal agents were already examining the scene, taking photos, scanning, tagging. The floorboards near the back wall had been torn up, exposing a trapdoor they'd found the night before, but Agent Rivera stood at a different corner. "There's something else," she said. Granger moved closer. The boards beneath her feet looked newer, too smooth compared to the aged wood around them. Boone arrived, chewing a toothpick nervously. "Kota's been stuck on this spot since we got here," he said. "Won't leave it." Rivera handed Granger a crowbar. "Want to do the honors?" Granger didn't hesitate. The wood splintered upward with a sharp crack, revealing another trapdoor, smaller, made of metal, secured with a thick iron latch. Rivera stepped back. Kota let out a low, mournful growl, not out of fear or anger, but sorrow, as if he already sensed what lay beneath. They unbolted the door and lifted it open. A cold breath rose from the darkness below, thick, damp, like the air of a sealed tomb. A spiral staircase disappeared into the pitch black. The kind of darkness that devours light. Granger switched on his flashlight. "I'll go first," he said. Boone looked hesitant. "You sure? I've walked into worse." Kota stepped in ahead, his tail low, body tense. They descended slowly. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, clinging and heavy, like wet cotton pressing against skin. Stone walls surrounded them, jagged and ancient, no signs of recent construction. This part of the building predated the orphanage. It was original to the foundation. At the bottom, the space opened up into a chamber about 20 feet wide. Stone walls, a dirt floor, metal tables lined the perimeter. Jars rested on wooden shelves, filled with yellowing liquid. Some held bones. Others, small pale hands or preserved eyes locked in eternal stares. Boone nearly retched. "Dear God," he murmured. Rivera covered her mouth. This is a lab." Granger stepped forward, hand on his holster. An old journal lay open on a table, its ink faded and pages wrinkled with moisture. A logbook, tightly written entries. Clinical and cold. Subject, M, age 9. High tolerance. Strong muscle fiber. Subject Junior, age 11. Respiratory failure after test for Subject KL. No known relatives. Transferred to Hargrave facility. Granger's jaw clenched. "Hargrave?" Rivera asked. "Isn't that the town doctor?" "He's been here 30 years, Granger said through gritted teeth. "I'll pull his records," Rivera said, grabbing her phone. Meanwhile, Kota moved to the back of the room and barked sharp, insistent. They followed him to a narrow tunnel, just wide enough for a person to walk hunched. Rivera looked to Granger. "You want to go in?" "Not yet." Granger turned to Boone. "Call in every agency. This isn't just child abuse, we're dealing with human experimentation." Outside, the town was already whispering. Not through official channels, but in Pine Hollow, rumors traveled faster than trucks. Parents began arriving at the sheriff's office, clutching faded photos. "She was here," one mother cried. "After the fire, Margaret took her." Churches held vigils. The mayor pleaded for calm. School was cancelled until further notice. But Granger wasn't at his desk. He was already on the road to Hargrave's residence, a colonial-style home 2 miles outside of town. White fence, ivy, chimneys, a porch that creaked in the breeze. When Granger and Kota arrived, the gate stood open. The quiet was unsettling. He knocked, no answer. Knocked again, nothing. He tried the handle, it was unlocked. "Stay close," he whispered to Kota. The dog crept forward, nose low to the floor. The living room looked untouched. Bookshelves, leather armchair, framed degrees from Yale and Johns Hopkins. Then Kota growled at the floor vent. Granger crouched down. The smell hit him. Immediately chemical decay. He pried the grate loose. A note was taped underneath. "Some knowledge requires sacrifice. Don't come looking." The house was empty, but not the shed out back. Agents found vials. surgical tools, restraints, and beneath a hidden panel, dozens of files, each labeled with initials. Photos, biometric data, detailed logs on the subjects, reactions to pain, drugs, and surgeries. Boone was speechless. Rivera had to step outside for air. Granger picked up one file and froze. Subject L.A., age 12. Vocal resistant. Suspected group leader. Transfer postponed awaiting buyer instructions. Louisa Aguilar. Eliza's full name. She's still here, Granger said. They haven't moved her yet. We'll find her, Rivera said. But Cota was already moving. A storm was brewing again. Clouds churning low, trees groaning in the wind. Cota led the way through the woods behind Hargrave's house. 3 men followed close behind. Rifles at the ready, their flashlights cutting through the darkness in nervous sweeps. They reached an old root, cellar partially collapsed and hidden under a blanket of brush and leaves. Cota barked, clawing at the edge. Granger joined him, helping to pry open the weather-worn door. Inside, in the pitch black, they found a girl, gagged, but alive. Eliza. Her eyes locked onto Cota's, and she smiled. They carried her out as the first drops of rain began to fall sharp and cold, like nails dropped from the sky. Eliza clung to Cota's neck and whispered something into his ear, something no one else could hear. But whatever she said, Cota stood a little taller than he had in days. Granger turned to the team around him. I want every road in and out of this county sealed off. Hargrave's gone, but not far. And if Margaret Dawson so much as steps into a train station, I want alarms going off from here to Texas. Boone nodded. You got it? Back at the station, Granger stood alone in the evidence room. The walls were lined with case files, photographs, and memories of children the world had forgotten. Except the ones who still cried quietly in the dark. A new bulletin board had been mounted that afternoon. At the top, a photo of Cota. Just below it, Eliza's handwriting. Some heroes don't need words. They just need someone willing to hear them. By morning, the storm had passed, slipping away like a thief too tired to finish the job. It left behind only what it couldn't carry. Granger stood on the front steps of the Pine Hollow Sheriff's Station, sipping lukewarm coffee from a battered tin mug. The events of the last 72 hours hadn't fully sunk in. Maybe they never would. Children held underground. A respected doctor, with blood on his hands, a woman once praised for her generosity, now listed as wanted in 3 states. And still, most of the town didn't want to believe it. I think people like to believe monsters don't wear pearls. Granger muttered. Behind him, Cota huffed and settled beside the deputy's desk. His fur was still damp from the rescue, but his eyes were clear, steady, alert. The FBI had taken over the old post office down the street, a building unused since emails replaced handwritten letters inside. Agent Rivera had transformed it into a command center. She organized files, like a field commander mapping a campaign. This is bigger than we imagined, she told Granger. Much bigger. She pushed a map toward him. Red pins marked locations across Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana. These aren't just isolated missing children cases, she explained. Every one of them connects to either Margaret Dawson, Walter Hargrave, or one of the charities they supported. Granger followed a pin line from Pine Hollow to Baton Rouge. What's there? A clinic, Rivera said. It was presented as a children's research facility closed in 2019 after a whistleblower came forward. She didn't need to say it. Granger already knew who had been on the board. Margaret Dawson's name had moved from church fundraisers and polite society pages to federal bulletins, border watch lists, and national news tickers. She had disappeared cleanly, no digital trail, no financial activity. No confirmed sightings, but Granger knew better. People like her didn't just disappear, they pulled the curtain and built a new show. And the freight linet was still active that night. Boone returned from another sweep of the Hargrave property, his face pale, eyes wide. You need to see this, he said. Dropping a stack of black and white trail camera photos onto Granger's desk, the first image showed a covered wagon leaving the rear of Hargrave's land. The second, taken 2 hours later, captured that same wagon parked at Cottonwood Railyard abandoned since the textile mill shut down in '92. The third image froze the room. A man in a wide-brimmed hat, loading crates into an unmarked rail car, and standing beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. Margaret Dawson. Granger slammed the phone onto the receiver. Wake every agent within a 60-mile radius. I want boots on the ground at that yard in 20 minutes. Boone hesitated. You want me to call Nashville too? Granger grabbed his keys and had double quotes. No, not this time. We're not waiting on red tape. Cottonwood Railyard looked like something out of an old ghost story. 3 rusted tracks, a collapsing station house, and a leaning signal tower that seemed to regret still standing. But the rail car wasn't a ghost. It sat idle on the center track, hitched to a battered diesel engine that looked like it hadn't moved in years. Granger, Boone Rivera, and 2 federal agents advanced from opposite flanks. Cota crouched low to the ground, his fur bristling, nose twitching rapidly, and just as they closed in, a voice rang out. Keep your hands where I can see them. A gunshot rang out, slicing through the yard with a sharp crack. Granger ducked behind a rail crate and fired a single shot in return. Rivera hit the ground, gesturing for her team to circle around. Boone crouched low behind a barrel, shouting, We've got armed suspects. Cota didn't hesitate. He sprang over the barricade and disappeared into a rail car with a guttural snarl that seemed to tear through the air. Inside the car, disorder erupted. 2 men stood near a stack of crates. One reached for a shotgun, but Cota was quicker, himself into the man's chest and knocking him to the floor. The gun spun away across the metal floor. The second suspect bolted. Cota ignored him, heading straight for the largest crate at the center of the car. He clawed at it, barking in short, sharp bursts. Seconds later, Granger rushed in, with Boone right behind him. Cover the entrance. Granger barked, ripping open the crate's lid. Inside, swaddled in a wool blanket and barely responsive, was a young boy no older than 6. Granger blinked, stunned. It was Noah Garrett, who had vanished 5 months earlier from a church picnic in Louisiana. His face had been a fixture on the missing persons wall in the sheriff's department since midsummer. Granger lifted him gently and passed him to Rivera as other agents stormed in to secure the area. Get medical on site now, Rivera ordered into her radio. Outside, sirens wailed. By night's end, 6 children were recovered, all sedated, each wearing paper wristbands, marked only with their initials and body weight. Near the conductor's seat, a small box held coded shipping logs easily decrypted. The files listed dozens of children, complete with names, ages, destinations, and prices. One chilling column reads simply, Client approval, yes, no. At the station, Eliza May sat curled in a blanket beside a heater. She had barely spoken since her rescue, but when Cota entered the room, her expression changed. She smiled. Without a sound, he lay down next to her. Granger stood nearby, nursing his 4th cup of coffee. You ever seen a dog read people like that? He asked Rivera. She shook her head. I've worked canine across 3 states. Never seen one this instinctive. It's like he's sensing spirits, not smells. Granger nodded. That's what it feels like. Over the next 2 days, Pine Hollow shifted from a quiet town to the epicenter of a national investigation. News trucks clogged Main Street. Journalists gathered on the courthouse lawn. Federal agents, trauma teams, and medical professionals arrived by the dozen, and Margaret Dawson was still missing. Her car was discovered at a truck stop outside Birmingham, wiped clean of fingerprints. In the glove compartment, a scorched phone and a torn page from a children's Bible. It read, Do not weep for me, for I have already paid. That night, Granger sat alone in his office. The bulletin board had grown to cover an entire wall: photos, names, lines, connecting faces. He stared at an old picture of Margaret Dawson receiving a civic award a decade ago. Smiling children gathered around her. He ripped it down. In the hallway, Cota's ears flicked toward the sound of creaking floorboards. Granger looked over. You think she'll keep running? He asked. Cota didn't move, but his gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, The wind had picked up not with storm, but with a dry, empty chill. A warning. They caught her in Kansas, not hiding, not disguised. Margaret Dawson sat calmly in a church pew, wearing pearls and sipping tea beside the women's ministry group. She had joined them 3 days earlier under the name Mrs. Evelyn Traz, claiming to be a widow from Charleston looking to serve her community and bake pies for fundraisers. That's how predators survive, by changing masks, not disappearing. Rivera got the tip-off at 5:14 a.m. By 7 o'clock, federal vehicles rolled into Cedar Grove, population 11,008, and pulled Margaret Dawson off the church bench before the second hymn had ended. That evening, back in Tennessee, she was escorted down the hallway of Pine Hollow Station. She didn't appear frightened as weary. The look of someone who had spent a lifetime evading justice. Granger stood on the other side of the observation glass. She glanced up and offered a faint smile. "You've lost weight, Thomas," she said softly. He remained silent. The interrogation room was stark, just a single overhead light, a glass of water, a recorder. Rivera sat across from her. Granger leaned silently against the wall. "This is your one shot at cooperation," Rivera said. "One. No deals, no bargaining, just the truth." Margaret took a sip of water and glanced at the mirror. "I always thought I'd die before anyone figured it out," she said. "Guess I was wrong." Rivera leaned closer. "How long?" Margaret's expression softened. 31 years. Granger felt a wave of nausea. "Why?" Rivera pressed, but Margaret let out a dry laugh. "Because people like you never look where the ground is soft." Outside the station, the townspeople had gathered, not in protest, not in vigil, but simply to be present. Mothers, mail carriers, teachers, children peering through fences, waiting, watching, hoping for answers. Granger stepped outside and addressed the press. "Margaret Dawson is now in federal custody," he said, his voice raw. "She faces charges of conspiracy, trafficking, and child endangerment. The investigation is ongoing. But this I can promise you," he turned his gaze toward the barn in the distance. "This town won't allow anything like this to happen again." Inside the office, Cota lay beside Eliza May. She still wasn't speaking much, but that day, she gave him a drawing. It showed Cota, the barn, and a child climbing out of the darkness into light. She pointed to the paw print in the corner and smiled. That same week, the FBI extended its investigation to 3 additional states. What began in a Tennessee barn had unveiled a sprawling trafficking ring masquerading as charity and medical aid. Agents uncovered financial records, emails, and encrypted video files, some featuring children being examined by wealthy clients overseas. One file bore a chilling label, Client MB London. Requested heterochromia. Age 8. Delivery expected 7/12. Meanwhile, Margaret Dawson remained calm in her cell, even as lawyers from 5 states argued over jurisdiction. Her words during the interrogation haunted Granger. "People don't believe it when evil smiles at them." The trial opened the next month at the federal courthouse in Memphis, BROADCAST, across the country. Granger took the stand. Boone, Rivera, and 2 of the rescued children testified. But the moment that left the courtroom utterly still was when Eliza May entered. She wore a neat navy blue dress, her hair freshly brushed, clutching a small stuffed dog. She didn't glance at Margaret, her gaze went straight to the judge. "My name is Eliza May," she said quietly. "I remember everything." Then she spoke. She described the nights spent underground, the visitors wearing gloves, shining flashlights. Margaret's voice drifting down from above the trapdoor, saying, "Good children, stay quiet." Cota waited outside the courtroom, stretched out in the hallway. Photographers tried to capture him, but he never posaged, remained still, as loyal as ever. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all 28 counts. Sentencing was delayed to allow for more charges from other states. As Margaret was led out in cuffs, she glanced back at Granger and said, "You were always too curious, Thomas." He stayed silent, but Cota responded, a single, sharp bark. That echoed like a full stop. Back in Pine Hollow, the work was only beginning. The barn was boarded up and scheduled to be torn down. The tunnels beneath it were to be sealed, but no one in town would forget what had once been buried there. That Sunday, the town gathered in the square. A memorial plaque was placed beneath the old oak tree, honoring the voices that were silenced and those who had found theirs again. A bronze casting of Cota's pawprint lay at its base. Federal investigations stretched on for months. Across 5 states, 27 people were arrested, among them medical professionals, court officials, and 2 former senators. In rural Arkansas, a clinic was raided and 4 more children were found. Every one of them remembered hearing the sound of a train. 6 months later, Agent Rivera adopted Eliza May. She returned to school and had a dog of her own now. But every Sunday, she asked to go back to Pine Hollow, to sit beneath the tree and read to Cota. As for Cota, he was officially retired, but no one told him that. He still arrived at the station each morning, still hopped into the front seat when calls came in. He made his usual rounds around the property, as if expecting something to return. But more often than not, he lay quietly in the grass near the old barn's remains, ears alert, always listening. One afternoon, a class of elementary school kids visited the memorial. Their teacher knelt beside the plaque and shared the story of a sheriff who refused to look away, of a young girl who refused to forget, and of a dog who heard cries no one else could. A boy raised his hand. What kind of dog was he? The teacher smiled. The kind that didn't need a badge to be a hero. Not every story ends with applause. Some finish on a quiet morning, with a half-full mug of coffee warming in the sun and a dog dozing at your feet, his head resting on your boot, as if the world is finally safe enough to sleep. That was Sheriff Granger's life. 6 months had passed since the barn came down, since Margaret Dawson's name had faded from daily headlines, since the children who once hid in silence were now laughing and running through open fields. Still, in Pine Hollow, the memory lingered, and Cota always knew where to sit when the wind grew heavy. The barn's former foundation had been transformed into a community garden, now home to a bronze statue of a boy reaching up toward the light. It was funded through donations from 6 states. Etched into the base were the names of all 31 children recovered and 1 more. Cota, a hero without a voice. Every Sunday, buses would arrive. Families came with flowers, with drawings. One little girl left behind a tennis ball and a note that read, "Thank you for hearing me." Sheriff Granger never got comfortable with the spotlight. Invitations poured in from police academies, trauma centers, even Congress. He turned most of them down, but when the Department of Justice invited him to Washington to accept a medal on Cota's behalf, he couldn't refuse. The event was broadcast live. Cota wore a blue service vest and stood calm among a sea of officials and officers. The Secretary of Defense called him the most effective non-human agent of the decade. But when Granger stepped up to speak, he didn't talk about training or instincts. He said this: "We teach law enforcement to follow evidence. This dog followed pain, and he was never wrong." Following the ceremony, the DOJ awarded Cota an honorary rank, Deputy First Class. His custom collar was engraved with badge number 107, the number of days it took to dismantle the Dawson network. Back in Pine Hollow, the local high school gym hosted a celebration. Mayor Tully called it the day we thanked the dog who saved us. There were balloons, a massive sheet cake, and rows of kids holding up handmade signs in crayon. "Thank you, Cota." Cota sat quietly on stage next to Granger, his tail giving the occasional wag, mostly unfazed by the attention. He didn't need celebrations, just the reassurance that people were safe. Boone had been promoted to chief deputy and now oversaw the station's daily operations. Rivera had joined a new federal task force aimed at dismantling trafficking operations disguised as charitable organizations. And Eliza, she flourished. Now in 5th grade in Nashville, her favorite subject was science. Every month, she still Mailed drawings to the sheriff often featuring Kota soaring through the sky in a superhero cape. Granger kept each one tucked into a folder in his desk. Every time he opened it, it made him smile. The town began to shift in quiet, meaningful ways. More residents started volunteering at the local foster home. Background checks became a serious practice rather than just a routine. And people stopped ignoring strange noises during the night. One boy summed it up perfectly during a classroom discussion. "We don't just watch out for trouble anymore, we listen for it." Kota was aging. His movements slowed, especially on chilly mornings. A cloud had formed in one corner of his left eye, but whenever Granger reached for his boots, Kota was at the door, ready as ever, his tail wagging like he had one more mission ahead. For him, retirement didn't mean stepping away, it meant staying near, alert, always listening. His work was never truly over. One day, Granger brought him to a new shelter at the county's edge, named in his honor, the Kota Center for Healing and Rescue. The facility was built to support children recovering from trauma, offering therapy, art, and canine-assisted emotional care. Eliza was there for the ribbon cutting. She wore a purple shirt that read Survivor and Storyteller. Before the ceremony, she knelt beside Kota and whispered something in his ear. When Granger asked what she said, she smiled and replied, "I told him I'm not afraid of thunder anymore." Later that week, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office, postmarked from Baltimore. Inside was a check for $25,000 made out to Heroes for Animals. The memo line read, "For the one who listened first." A short note was included. The children weren't the only ones saved that day. Some of us were watching quietly, hidden behind desks, walls, and silence. That dog didn't just hear suffering, he gave us permission to feel it too. It was signed by an anonymous donor. Granger kept that letter in the top drawer of his desk. Some days he reread it during lunch. Other days, he just looked down at the floor where Kota always lay, and gave a quiet nod. Years later, after Kota had passed, he was laid to rest beneath the old oak tree in the community garden where the barn once stood. Children placed heart-shaped stones on his grave. Granger added a silver whistle among them. He had never used it, but if it were ever needed, Kota would have heard it. Pine Hollow never forgot. The local schools taught students how to speak up. When something didn't feel right, Kota's badge hung in the sheriff's office entryway, and every first Sunday in June, people from across the country gathered to honor the memory of a dog who didn't just save lives, he taught others how to truly listen. This journey was shaped by real canine heroes and the voices of children too. Often unheard, it's a story of heartbreak, truth, courage, and healing. We hope it left you with something to carry forward. The reminder that healing can begin with one bark, one truth, and one soul willing to listen.